Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters here on Front 24. I'm Catherine Norris-Trent. Coming up in this week's show, as the war and terror continue in Syria, we speak to the French medic who's been training doctors there in much-needed emergency medicine. As Turkey's economy flounders, a patriotic push is underway to try and boost the currency, the Turkish lira. And living on the edge, we'll bring you a report on the Gazan farmers who say they're in danger if they work their land too close to the border with Israel. First, there have been yet more terrible, deadly scenes of war and destruction in Syria this week as Syrian government troops and their allies closed in on the last rebel territory in eastern Aleppo. Civilians trapped there sent goodbye messages, bidding farewell to the outside world, saying they faced a choice between being killed in relentless bombing or being arrested and thrown into government jails. Well, just back from Syria is the French doctor Raphael Pitti, who works with the NGO, the Union of Medical Care and Relief Organisations, helping medical teams on the ground and providing them with emergency medical training. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Pitti, for coming in to talk to us. Obviously, the humanitarian situation in Syria is abysmal. Can you tell us what you and your teams have heard, what you're seeing in Aleppo, what you're hearing from people you've worked with on the ground?
We've been working in Syria with the UOSSM for the past 5 years. It's an NGO that trains doctors so they're prepared to treat war wounds. There's a network of more than 7,500 people, and they give us a continuous supply of information about the situation. And the situation in Aleppo is deteriorating in an appalling way. It's the biggest catastrophe since the last war, and there are crimes being perpetrated, in particular by the Syrian army. We know, for example, that people had taken refuge at the Al Hayat hospital and they were pursued by government soldiers and massacred there. Medical personnel were among them. Some just about managed to escape, others were massacred on the spot, including some of them with knives. The bombings have resulted in houses being blown apart, with families inside who couldn't get out. There have also been reports of rapes, but we can't confirm that. The situation is really catastrophic, and the people in these neighborhoods are afraid to go out. They're scared of going to the regime because they know that the government discriminates. There's a filter where the young men are separated from the old. The young men are forced to become soldiers. The older ones are taken to the Air Force Intelligence Center, where they're interrogated to find out if they're activists or not. The doctors are also very afraid. There's still a dozen of them in Aleppo. Since the very start, they've been considered activists themselves because they cared for those who were wounded, whether they were fighters or not. I spoke with one of the surgeons who told me that he had destroyed all of the medical photos and all of the records he had, and he'd also burned all of his books because he's afraid of being treated like an activist. They know about the contents of the 50,000 photos that were taken during Operation Caesar that showed prisons and tortures. They're afraid of being treated in the same way.
You have been working inside Syria yourself. You've got several clinics there. You've been setting up hospitals. How difficult is it for you to do this medical work inside Syria, given that doctors have become a target in this war?
It's a terrible situation that has never existed elsewhere. In any case, it's a crime against humanity and a war crime to destroy hospitals, to target and kill doctors, and these crimes go unpunished. Our colleagues are very courageous, and they're working in a worsening and increasingly important situation because they're lacking in medicine, medical equipment, and surgical tools. It's always been very difficult to get them supplies within Syria, and so most of the doctors after 3 or 4 years just finally gave up because the danger was too persistent. It's always there. In recent months, especially in hospitals, Medical students have been replacing the specialists. There are people working as nurses who aren't nurses, midwives who aren't midwives. And all of this while the terrible situation is ongoing. There's a constant risk of being bombed.
What does the international community need to do, in your opinion, to help this situation at this desperate stage?
I feel personally revolted by the fact that the international community has done nothing over the past 5 years. Constantly, crimes against humanity and war crimes are being denounced by the UN, but there's never been any action. All the resolutions presented to the UN, even the humanitarian ones, have been blocked by Russia. So I've realized that the destruction of Aleppo also means the destruction of humanitarian law, and the UN itself at the same time. It's proved to be ineffective.
I'm afraid there's much more we could talk about, but we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise, Dr. Raphael Pitti there. Other news from the region now, and elsewhere in Syria, the Islamic State group retook the ancient city of Palmyra after days of heavy fighting, and despite heavy bombardment by Russian warplanes, the jihadists retook the city where they were forced out in March. There's huge concern about the ancient structures still remaining in the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Egypt declared 3 days of mourning after a suicide bomber blew himself up inside a Coptic Christian church this Sunday, killing some 25 people. The Egyptian Interior Ministry accused the Muslim Brotherhood of financing and supporting the attack, the worst in recent years to target Egypt's Coptic Christian community. And Turkish authorities have arrested more than 230 people that the government says have links to the outlawed Kurdish movement, the PKK. This comes after twin bombings outside a stadium in Istanbul left 44 people dead, most of them police officers. A Kurdish militant group says it was behind the blast. Staying in Turkey now, where the economy is increasingly shaky. Exports are down and tourism revenue too, following a string of attacks. But Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is trying to boost the Turkish currency, calling on patriotic citizens to exchange any foreign currency for the downtrodden lira. And local businesses have been encouraging the drive too, as Mariam Saab reports.
This bakery in Istanbul is bartering bread with its most patriotic of patrons. Over the next few days, anyone who exchanges their foreign currency for the Turkish lira will be offered a baguette in return. The pro-lira push has won the praise of the president.
My bakery is one of the first businesses in Turkey to launch this incentive. Our president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, called me personally to say thank you.
This follows the Turkish president's wider call, appealing for Turks to cash in their foreign exchange holdings in a bid to boost the plunging lira, which has lost nearly 1/5 of its value against the dollar this year. Other businesses are backing the move. In central Istanbul, there are bagels, dumplings, and even a free haircut on offer for those who've converted at least $250. However popular, the initiative is difficult to regulate. Few people present proof of their currency exchange. The scheme has had its share of fans and skeptics who point to the still floundering Turkish lira.
These are bribes. If they want to take money from the pockets of the poor by any means, then I am against this measure.
The Turkish government says the dissidents behind the July coup are to blame for the country's economic woes, while some analysts say the government's subsequent crackdown flawed the lira. Now Turkey is looking for a turnaround, one that will help it realise its ambition of joining the ranks of the 10 richest countries in the world by 2023.
Finally, to the Gaza Strip. Now, officially, the 300 metres from the border with Israel are out of bounds to Palestinians there. But on the ground, Gaza residents are complaining that it's risky for them to even be much further out, 1.5 kilometres from the border. And that's making life hard for farmers whose land lies on the edge of the Strip. This report now from Gaza with Jimmy Hutchin and Nicolas Rupert.
Like every other day, Atta and his son are making their way to their field in the east of the Gaza Strip. This Palestinian farmer grows zucchinis 600 meters from the border with Israel.
The border is over there. You can see it there. The Hamas watchtower is only 200 meters away from here. There. You can see the Israeli White Watching Tower.
Up to 1,500 meters from the border, the Israeli army monitors the slightest population movement. This is to prevent new tunnels that would lead to Israeli territory. The soldiers often open fire if Palestinian farmers approach a little too closely.
I don't have other choices. How am I going to feed my family if I do not work in this field? It's very dangerous. Why? Because while I'm standing here, they could shoot me.
Like Atta, 170,000 people live from their fields here. For 4 years, a French NGO has developed a program to support these Palestinian farmers. Without their financial and material help, Palestinian farmers simply would not be able to go on with their work.
The restricted part of the Gaza Strip represents 17% of the total area and 35% of the whole farmable area. By restricting access to this area, it compromises the production and the self-sufficiency of thousands of people.
The Israeli army is very concerned about infiltrations into its territory from Hamas militants. But the Islamist movement denies any involvement.
The Israelis are narrowing the space of the farmers and forbid them from planting on their lands, and sometimes shooting at them. They do the same on the sea by forbidding the fishermen to go at sea, by chasing them, and often opening fire at them.
In the last 2 weeks, the Israeli army has taken action at least 16 times against Gazan farmers. 2 Palestinian fishermen have been arrested in the open sea.
Well, that's it from Middle East Matters. See you next time.